Welcome to this edition of Education Matters. I'm Shirley Brandman, President of the Board of Education and your host. On today's show, we're discussing the 2012 legislative session in Annapolis and how the work of the General Assembly may impact our students here at MCPS. And to help me start the conversation, I'm delighted to be joined by State Delegate Byron Feldman, who's the chair of the Montgomery County House Delegation and who represents District 15. Thank you for being here, Byron, and welcome to Education Matters.
Great to be here, Shirley.
Thank you. So the legislative session has just started in Annapolis, and what I'd love for you to start is just tell us a little bit about some of the issues that will affect education in this session.
Well, you know, you start with always our state budget. That's what our primary constitutional responsibility is in Annapolis, and the biggest, by far, chunk of our state budget is education. So about 50% of the state budget's right there. And we're going through a difficult time trying to struggle to balance. We have to balance our budget each and every year under our Constitution. And we're trying to we have a shortfall of sorts, about $1 billion. So some of the challenges of budgetary constraints, unfortunately, education then becomes in the middle of the mix. But we've had a massive investment over the last decade in K through 12 education. Basically from about $2.8 billion at the state level all the way to $5.7 billion last year, and that investment's paid off. We were ranked, as you well know, this year the fourth straight year to have the #1 public schools in the United States of America, largely because of the great schools here in Montgomery County. Frankly, if you take Montgomery County out of the equation, maybe we wouldn't be a #1, but it's a massive investment. We want to try to keep that investment going. But we really have a difficult budget situation this year.
Yeah, no, I think it's so critically important for people to understand that the state really has held the line on education funding and that there have been dollars coming to Montgomery County Public Schools through formulas at the state level that have been critical for us. Our enrollment is growing. We have students coming to us with great need and increasing need, many more students who live in poverty, and those formulas really have made a huge difference.
Yes, I mean, you make a great point. So at a time when the state pie has actually been shrinking overall, the one area that we've held harmless has been K through 12 education. It's been very difficult to do, but we've managed to do it. And again, there's a new legislative session, a new set of challenges that we'll talk about.
Yeah. Well, so opening the session, the governor has put out his proposed budget. And one of the pieces of good news in the budget is he has proposed a significant increase in state construction dollars.
Yes.
So do you want to talk a little bit about what that might mean for Montgomery County?
It's important for people to understand we have we have an operating budget and we have a capital budget. We are one of only 9 states, the United States of America, Maryland that is, that has a AAA bond rating, which means that our interest rates are nice and low. Money right now is very cheap. And so what Governor O'Malley has proposed is a $372 million statewide school construction figure, which I think should translate, I hope, down to Montgomery County. It's somewhere maybe 40, 50 million or more dollars for school construction. It's a great time to build schools. The other thing, of course, is when you build schools, that's good for job creation purposes. But most importantly, it's great for the kids to upgrade our school system. So money's cheap, taking advantage of the AAA bond rating, and so we're almost at record levels as far as school construction money. Last year was about $250 million, right, and we were able to get about $40 million for Montgomery. So this year we're talking statewide $372 million, so we should certainly get something more than the 40, hopefully, you know, as I say, 50, 60 million.
Right, and I think it's critical because I know from our perspective advocating for those dollars and for a share to come to Montgomery County, because we are actually one of the few jurisdictions in Maryland where our enrollment is increasing. So we face the double challenge of needing to have enough seats to meet growing enrollment, but also having some buildings that are quite dated and needing to bring those facilities up to par.
Well, I would add, actually, we are the jurisdiction that has the fastest growing school population in the state of Maryland. And so one thing I should say that the governor has released his budget. Actually, under his proposal, we do actually get about $25 million more dollars for Montgomery County in direct state aid over last year, but that's almost entirely as a result of the increase in the population of our school enrollment. So
right,
that's a little bit of good news, but there
yes,
again, we'll talk about some other challenges, but right off the bat, in terms of operating dollars, $25 million extra dollars over a year ago.
Right. Well, one of the other proposals that's getting a lot of attention in the governor's budget is he has proposed for the first time passing back some of the costs from the state teacher retirement system to the counties. And there's grave concern about what that might mean. Can you give us a little bit of the history and context and then your thoughts?
Yes, for the past 85 years or so, we've had a system in Maryland, which is unique. There's only 3 states in the United States where the state basically picks up the cost of the local teachers' pension system, if you will. But under this proposal, and I should say the cost of that system has skyrocketed at the state level. So just in 2006, that was about $460 million at the state level. Has ballooned all the way to about $930 million at the state level this year. So one of the things, of course, at the state level, we can solve a lot of our budget problems by just sticking it to the counties and passing the costs on to the poor county council and county executive and boards of education. And so, yes, this is a big issue for Montgomery County. We've been thinking it could happen for many, many years. It finally has happened in a proposal by the governor himself. The stakes are very, very high for Montgomery County. This is really one of the few formulas in the state of Maryland that actually benefits Montgomery County. We have a lot of formulas in the education arena that are wealth equalized, but don't necessarily benefit Montgomery County. We have this huge, again, increase in school population. We have the most teachers of any county in the state. Our teachers make a little more money. And so this system currently, we do pretty good under, and we don't want to see many changes, if any. So the stakes, again, are very high. And I think if it were to be shifted under a complex formula, that really, I think in the out years, after the first year or two, we're talking 30, 40, $50 million a year that our county government will have to absorb. And that obviously will impact the ability to fund education here at the local level. So this is a high stakes game, and I think our delegation at the current time is very much opposed to this proposal, and we'll see how things play out. But there are many other moving parts to the equation.
Well, it's interesting because you started by talking about the state's constitutional obligation to education, and actually the state teacher retirement system has the product, some of the costs involved are because we made a commitment under Thornton to spend money on education. As you said, we've reaped the benefits. And because we've had the teacher challenge system where we as a state wanted to be a place that would attract the best teachers and have the resources to retain the best teachers, decisions were made at the state level to do that and to make us competitive. Some of it was in 2006, making some of those benefits retroactive, because at that time our pension system ranked really low nationally. Right. So those were the right decisions, but they were the state level decisions.
Yeah, this is a point, because I think when people are going to read about this over the next few weeks, a lot of people say, well, the cost of the pension system is skyrocketed because teacher salaries have gone up in Montgomery County and that type of thing. It's actually not the primary driving, by far the most significant factor in this huge uptick in the cost. It has to do with the underperforming stock market and our rate of return that the pension fund has essentially underperformed similar systems in the rest of the country. That one factor has been a major contributor, not nearly the teacher pension, the teacher salary increase that many want to attribute it to. So I just want to throw that out there. We're going to hear a lot of rhetoric, I think, on this subject over the next few weeks.
And then, of course, one of the most important issues for education advocates in this session is the issue of maintenance of effort.
Right.
And how we look at the maintenance of effort obligation that was created under state law, which was, just to summarize really briefly, as you talked about, as the state increased its contribution to local jurisdictions for funding, the theory was that local communities would continue to maintain their effort so that state dollars could amplify but not replace local dollars.
Sure.
There have been some changes recently that have created an understanding that there are cracks in that system, and I'm wondering if you talk about what you think might happen
this
this
is again a very important issue that we're dealing with this year. So as I said, we've had record increases over the last 10 years in education funding at the state level. We again reaping some of the benefits of that. But what we found, and this is also true here in Montgomery County, that while the state is increasing its investment, the locals have actually not kept up. And so under these provisions, what is current law is if you want these increases, you need to keep that funding level equal as much as last year. Otherwise, you basically get penalized. You actually don't get those increases. In Montgomery County right now, did not meet that state law requirement and is facing something to the tune of about a $25–26 million penalty, if you will, also hanging over our heads, which we're also going to try to resolve as part of this, again, grand negotiation on a lot of moving parts. So this is important, an important part of, I think, how we address the session, because at the end of the day, it's about what dollars we can bring back in Annapolis to our county so we can invest in our schools. But last year, we actually brought back at the state level about a 7.5% increase in funding. Unfortunately, that money was not necessarily, again, invested directly into the schools, and so that is an issue. It's, you know, we're looking at changes in state law, so I think it's a big issue.
Well, I will say, I realize no one has a crystal ball, but there have been some efforts to try and look at maintenance of effort the last few years. Do you think this is the year when we will actually see some reform?
I do. There's several proposals that are being worked on currently, and I think this is the year we want to fix it. As part of the whole conversation about the pension system, MOE needs to be part of that conversation. So yes, I am cautiously optimistic we're going to improve the current law, which is not working, and that's unfortunate. It did work for a long time, but when we had the economic downturn, it put some pressure on the locals, and in fact some of the flaws in the law then sort of came to the surface. So we were able to sort of avoid those flaws, but not so much, so we need to fix it. We do need to fix it.
So one question that I think people watching the show could ask is, if I'm a citizen, an interested education advocate, a parent, what's the best way to convey my concerns to our delegation in Annapolis?
Well, I would say this, whether it's the PTA groups, the board members themselves, parents, it is one of the most proactive, I would say, groups in Annapolis via email, telephones, but I think that we have a citizens legislature. We all actually know many of the people who are out front as advocates in this area, and I would just say email your state senator, your state delegate, send them a letter, a hard copy letter, call them. But I think the critical mass in terms of just the numbers of calls and emails that come in on these subjects do make a difference. They definitely do make a difference, and so I would encourage everybody to do just that.
And in terms of information that's important to you, when you hear from folks in the community, is it folks sharing with you their thoughts, their stories? What information helps you most?
Well, I think personalizing it. I mean, these are all these abstract numbers we deal with in budgets. You know, recently we've had several forums where teachers have actually come in and spoke about personal stories about how these proposed cuts, either in salaries or investments in the classroom or class size increases, it impacts the way they teach, the quality of the education, you know, what the kids are getting. I mean, I would say the more personalized you can give the message, make the message, the more impact somebody like me, you know, sees it. I mean, again, taking dollars and budgets and putting it into real world consequences of the budget decisions we're making in Annapolis, that has an impact, absolutely.
Well, thank you. Brian, I really appreciate you taking the time to be with us today, and thank you for your leadership on behalf of education and with our delegation in Annapolis. So I need to say that this is all the time that we have for this segment. Thank you again for joining me today. We're going to take a quick break, but please stay tuned for more of Education Matters.
I remember taking off those training wheels. That was a big deal.
I was so proud of you.
Keep pedaling. Keep pedaling.
I worried. I didn't want him to get hurt.
You were there then.
Thanks for the keys, Mom.
Be involved now. Make sure your teen is safe behind the wheel. Take control.
Welcome back to Education Matters. In this segment, we'll be talking with two education advocates who are very involved in securing the finest in education, not just for their own children, but for students throughout Montgomery County. I'm delighted to welcome Lynne Harris. Lynne is the legislative chair for the Montgomery County Council of PTAs. Glad that you could join us today.
Thank you.
And next to Lynne is Byron Johns. Byron is the chair of the Montgomery County NAACP Parents Council. Welcome to Education Matters. Lynne, let's start with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do as the legislative chair for the PTAs?
At MCCPTA,
with the Legislative Committee, we're focusing on staying up to date on legislative issues at the county and state level that could impact children, families, public education. And at the state level, we're hoping also to, as the legislative session moves on, work with our Montgomery County delegation to help them help us keep as many education dollars as we can coming to Montgomery County.
Terrific. Byron, why don't you tell us a little bit about the mission of the NAACP Parents Council, and then you yourself have been involved recently in setting up a forum about maintenance of effort. Tell us how you got involved.
Yes, the Parents Council is a part of the Montgomery County NAACP, and as you know, the NAACP is the nation's largest and oldest civil rights organization. Our focus has been to work with Montgomery County Public Schools to empower parents to advocate for the best education they can provide for the school systems and provide equity throughout the system. So we are very much about grassroots, empowering, informing parents, making sure that they can represent their children and their guardians in the most effective manner, and making sure that we are very interested in making sure that the system and that the state also contributes to make sure that we have the resources to continue to make progress. We still have concerns in the African American minority communities about the achievement gap and the education deficit that has accumulated over years for lots of policies. So we are very interested in things like maintenance of effort, because it represents whether the school system will have the resources to continue to address that deficit that has occurred, that debt over time that has built up in our education system.
And when you work with your parent communities, how do you educate them about legislative issues, and what are some of the concerns that they are sharing with you about things that may be going on at the state or local level? Lynn, do you want to start?
With MCCPTA, of course, once a month we have our delegate assembly here in Rockville at the Carver Center. That's on the fourth Tuesday of every month, and at that meeting, representatives from every school in the county hopefully attend or send representatives through their clusters, and we discuss all manner of issues that have presented themselves since our meeting the month before on educational and budget issues, and in hopes that they then take that information back to their schools. And we also maintain our website at it's MCCPTA.com, and we post all kinds of legislative updates on there, information about upcoming forums on budgets, hearings. We know the past 2 Wednesdays we were participated in hearings for the Board of Education on educational issues, and we keep that website very current so parents can go there and see what's going on really day to day on issues that we're participating in and that we're watching and monitoring.
So Byron, when we think about, I had Delegate Feldman on earlier today, and he was talking about some of the things that have already come out in the legislative session of the governor's budget. Issues about school construction dollars. There's some glimmer of good news because the governor's proposing more dollars, but there's also issues about passing back pension costs from the state retirement system, and issues about maintenance of effort. So tell me a little bit about what you're hearing in your community.
Well, one of there's several issues that are very much in concern in the African American minority community also. Everything from school construction, we want to make sure that those communities that are perhaps not as endowed have the access to the kind of facilities. They very much, the school is the center of the community in many of these areas, and it is the path for these students and these families, frankly, to move themselves up socially and economically. So we're really very encouraged and want to make sure that there is adequate consideration for the minority and often those who are voiceless otherwise. This is a very wealthy and very highly educated population. Highly educated people and very wealthy people have a way of being able to advocate for themselves. We try to empower those who often have been marginalized and aren't necessarily as well equipped to advocate for themselves.
And Lynn, we were talking earlier about maintenance of effort. Byron was talking about that. You know, maintenance of effort really at its base is a promise, you know, that public education will be adequately funded, that there will be a partnership between the state level and the local level. What are some of the challenges that the membership of the MCCPTA has been talking about with respect to maintenance of effort recently?
A lot of our concerns have related to the fact that last year in the county's funding cycle, the county council did what is termed under maintenance of effort rebased, which is they reset the per pupil funding level in Montgomery County by not meeting maintenance of effort and then not asking for a waiver from the State Department of Education. And we understand in economic terms why that happened, but we also have concerns that we really need to hold the line, and you know, per pupil funding just can't decline anymore. We're seeing, you know, class sizes have increased dramatically. We have the fastest growing school system in the state. While school funding has diminished, class sizes and pupil population has increased, and that means the amount of money you have to spend on each student is going down. And we recognize too, we have a large we are now a majority minority school system. We have a large percentage of our students who are fighting poverty. We have a large segment of our community of students whose families don't necessarily speak English, which presents a whole range of challenges to their learning. And being able to support those students requires us to have, you know, staff on the ground in the schools. And when the funding for our school system is decreasing, we're seeing real world changes, diminishment in our school staffing, and that's a real challenge. And we just really need to hold the line on that.
Well, it sounds like, you know, from what you've both been saying, an important message for our parents and guardians in our community is that the resources that come to us are really about where the rubber meets the road, because our ability to meet students' needs, whether it's a growing population of students who come to us facing challenges from poverty, and we have, you know, the superintendent has said, we have more students in MCPS who are eligible for free and reduced meals than there are students in the public schools in the District of Columbia. So that is not people's image of Montgomery County, but that is the reality. And at the same time, as you were saying, Byron, for our communities, you know, the school is often the hub of a community, and when they look at a building or where they want it to be ready and able to make those students ready for the 21st century. And so I think that may be one of the connections we need to draw for the communities, that those dollars really do matter. Yes. Am I right?
Absolutely. I think it's key. I mean, we talk about, and you hear on the news about the unemployment rate. It's very, it's even more severe in the minority communities. And largely you can correlate and draw back to, you know, educational shortfalls along the way. Clearly, your educational attainment and the ability for the school system to resource and to provide the kind of interventions and the kind of support for students to make it through and to progress is going to have direct economic impact on the community. And so this is really not just a education for its independent sake. This is really about an economic empowerment for communities to continue to thrive. Right. We have a wonderful community, very diverse, very well endowed, and for that to continue, and we have as Brian mentioned, we have for the 4th year the #1 school system in the nation. For that to continue and for it to continue to grow economically, we're going to need to fund the schools, because that is how the future will be. It will be built on that either on that solid foundation or on that quicksand, depending on what we do.
Absolutely. Well, so when we sit in Montgomery County as parents or guardians, Annapolis seems very far away and seems like a whole foreign environment. So if I'm a parent who wants to be involved, what are some things that I can do? Lynn, why don't I start with you?
Well, I would say, first of all, we're very fortunate in Montgomery County that no matter which legislative district you live in this county, your legislators are 100% committed to public education. And I would say the first thing a parent should do is, it sounds simple, but a lot of people don't know what legislative district you live in and who is your state senator and who are your 3 General Assembly delegates. Find out who they are. You can do that by going to the Montgomery County Board of Elections website, and it's very easy to find that information. And then establish a relationship with them. They are your neighbors. They are parents of MCPS students as well. And, you know, take the time to call them up on the telephone, send them an email, because your contact with them, your personal story of how the schools and the state of the schools is affecting your child's life, your life, it matters to them, and they need to hear that, and they want to hear that. And nobody should feel like what they have to say doesn't matter, and nobody should feel like they don't have time to make that call or write that email, because you don't have to write, you know, War and Peace. You just have to, a couple of sentences can go a very long way.
And Byron, for the NAACP Parents Council, do you try to help facilitate that kind of relationship building also?
We do, and just thinking about your question, I mean, there are a couple things. One of the things that really gives voice is join your local PTA.
Absolutely.
Join the NAACP and become a voice. Use those organizations. Your ability to have collective voice weighs tremendously on the decisions, and where for those who are empowered to make decisions, they're looking for those voices. And it is critically important that to send that individual email, but also make yourself a part of this. Keep informed on these issues. It can be overwhelming. It's a lot of information that comes back and forth. But I can tell you the MCCPTA's website, they do a fabulous job of really trying to put it in English, understandable English. And we hold our monthly meetings. We hold third Saturday of the month at the County Council building on Maryland Avenue. We hold our meetings where we inform our parents and other interested advocates on what we can do in the schools. We certainly have had legislative figures come in and speak. We've had teachers, we've had our community superintendents, and we look for ways to really, information is power, and it really comes from, if you're going to advocate, you have to be informed on what you're advocating for. That's
Absolutely.
key.
And there is such a strong connection between what's happening at the state level and local level. I know there's an MCCPTA forum coming up that you may want to talk about on budget.
Yes, on February the 15th, the MCCPTA is sponsoring a Montgomery County Operating Budget Forum. It's at Richard Montgomery High School at 7:30 in the evening. And as Brian mentioned in the earlier segment, the operating budget is the budget that deals with everything in the school system but the buildings, the teachers and the materials and the resources and that sort of thing. And so a teacher can have a huge impact on a child's life. And in fact, those are the most important things, I think, is building those personal relationships. And we are fortunate to have a wonderful collection of teachers in our in MCPS, but they're doing so much more with so much less, and we really need to see what we can do to help them out.
Byron, I'll give you the last word on what are some of the priorities you'd like to see at the state or local level happen now.
Well, one of the things that we co-sponsor, the Parents Council and the MCCPTA co-sponsor the MOE Forum. I was really encouraged to have County Council and the Board of Education and the legislators all together, and the tone of being, we really want to support the schools. We want to support maintenance of effort. We want to continue to provide the resources needed for our students to learn to the best of their ability. And so nothing could be more important than having a tone of cooperation going forward. I look to see that our state and our local officials continue to work in a constructive and behavior, and keep that positive tone that was set.
Well put. Thank you. Well, that is all the time that we have for this edition of Education Matters. I really want to thank both of my guests for joining me today. If you would like to comment about today's program or have ideas that you would like to share, please call the Board of Education office at 301-279-3617 or send an email to boe@mcps-md.org. Thanks for joining me for this edition of Education Matters. I'm Shirley Brandman, and remember, education matters very much.